Well, good morning and welcome to the California Mortgage Bankers Association's Mortgage Quality and Compliance webinar. I'm Susan Milazzo. I run the California MBA, and I want to thank you for being a part of today's presentation. For those of you that are regulars with us, we hold these on the fourth Thursday of every month, and they are free to anybody in the industry. So if you were forwarded the invitation to participate today by a colleague in the industry, but you'd like to be on our lists, please email me at susan@cmba.com, and I'll be sure to add you to our email distribution list going forward. Also, if you are regularly join us. Today is the last webinar for the year of 2020. I'm not going to say I'm sorry to see the year of 2020 go for obvious reasons, but we are ending it on a great note. We've got a great presentation by MQMR today, so I know that it's going to be something that you guys are going to get a lot out of. We typically have a legislative update that we kick the event off, or kick the webinar off with, and our legislative session in California ended at the end of August, and on our last MQAC webinar, we kind of did the wrap up for the year. So we will resume our webinars and our regular speakers when we start again in January. So we'll be sending information out on that speaker and topic closer to the end of the year. What we do have before the end of the year that I'd like to bring to your attention is our annual Legal Issues and Regulatory Compliance Conference. That is happening virtually December 7th and 8th. I have included in the chat function on your menu screen the link to check out information on registration or sponsorship if you're interested in participating as a sponsor. We are putting the agenda together now and should have that probably posted on the website by next week. We are very happy to announce that we have secured the Commissioner of the newly named California Department of Financial Protection and Innovation. Commissioner Manuel Alvarez has been confirmed to speak at our conference. So I know that many of you are interested in kind of what his thoughts are with the new department and what his plans are for 2021. We are also be joined by a representative from this Conference of State Bank Supervisors, CSBS, to talk about the NMLS and some state examination issues. So great content that we're planning for that event, and I certainly hope that you can join us. So we'll go ahead and get things kicked off for today's presentation. I am going to introduce Carol Carson, who is the Chief Compliance Officer for Plaza Home Mortgage and also serves as our committee chair for the Mortgage Quality and Compliance Committee, and she will be introducing our speakers. Carol, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Susan, and good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining today. We have a really good presentation today, and I'm happy to introduce two terrific speakers from Mortgage Quality Management and Research, or MQMR. And we're also fortunate today because, in some respects, without having our legislative update and things that we usually have at the beginning of this presentation, our friends at MQMR have the entire time to themselves to make us all smarter about policies and procedures that most often get mixed up or messed up, and how to get them right, which is a really great topic. So let me introduce you to our two speakers. We have Michael Barone. He is the Executive Director of MQMR. And he is also a partner with the law firm of Abrams, Garfinkel, Margolis, and Bergson, which is a full-service law firm with offices on both coasts, in New York and California. And he oversees the firm's mortgage compliance and mortgage loan document preparation departments, and is a member of the firm's real estate and banking departments. Michael has over 20 years of experience representing nationally recognized mortgage lenders and brokers in in the alphabet soup of regulations, compliance, litigation matters, LO comp, so on and so forth, as we are all acutely aware. Michael has earned his law degree from Hofstra University School of Law, and he is often a frequent speaker at compliance-related topics at various industry and trade organization meetings. Excuse me. Our other speaker is Scott Weintraub, and he is the internal audit manager at MQMR, and he brings over nearly 20 years of experience in mortgage origination and servicing industries, focusing on legal and regulatory compliance, internal audit management, and organizational risk management. As an internal audit manager at MQMR, he assists clients in identifying potential areas of compliance and operational risk, as well as identifying best practices to keep clients operating more efficiently and effectively. In his past life, Scott also served as Chief Compliance Officer for a number of mortgage lenders on both the retail and wholesale channels. And in those capacities, he's created and implemented compliance management systems, enterprise risk management systems, policies and procedures, audit protocols, and so forth. Scott received his bachelor's degree in poli-sci from Stanford and his JD degree from George Washington University Law School. So with that, gentlemen, take it away. We're all can hardly wait to hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Carol, for that introduction. Both Mike and I are really excited to be on with everyone today, and for that task of trying to make people smarter. We'll do our best to that. But I think we have a lot of helpful information for all of you today. And included in that is, first, I think I'd like to tell you a little bit about MQMR and about what we do. So mortgage quality management and research. What our primary goal is to bridge the gap for our clients between risk management, internal audit, and compliance. And so specifically, for example, what Mike Barone and his team does is help companies with their compliance, including drafting, reviewing policies and procedures, the topic we'll be covering in detail today, and helping clients with their compliance management system, and even to the point of day-to-day compliance-related questions. What my team does is the internal audit function. And so we audit every department that an organization, a lender and or servicer would have. And included in that is reviewing the policies and procedures for each area and determining, for example, is the company following? Are they doing what they say that they're going to do in those policies and procedures? And we're looking at them to make sure that even if they are, those policies and procedures are effective and sufficient to meet legal and regulatory requirements, agency guidelines, etc. And so I think in both contexts in which Michael and myself work, policies and procedures are a big part of what we do. So I think that's a good lead-in to the agenda for today. So what are we going to be talking about today? That is, what policies and procedures do we find are often either missing entirely from the organizations with whom we work, or perhaps a policy and procedure exists, but it may be missing some key components to either allow the company to operate effectively or to meet all of the laws, regulations, and guidelines that are required for the lender in the particular space in which they work. So you can see the agenda that we have for the next a little bit less than an hour. We will start, Mike will take you through what's required. So what is expected of your organization related specifically to policies and procedures? So whether it's a federal or state regulator, or your agencies, Fannie and Freddie, for example, even state regulators, or your investors to whom you may be selling loans after they're originated. What do those various different entities require of an organization related to P&Ps. Secondly, both Mike and myself will then go over a pretty substantial list of P&Ps that we've seen that are common to have some issues. And so within each of those, we'll be pointing out what are some of the most important elements that those policies and procedures need to include, that hopefully you can take away when looking back at, and then going forth to look at your own company's policies and procedures to see, are they sufficient? Do they have all of these areas that have been pointed out, or maybe do we need to take a second look at them? And then as part of that, we'll make some recommendations. What are some best practices related to some of these policies and procedures that will, again, hopefully help you take that information back to your own organization when reviewing your policies and procedures, which we think is a process that you should be doing at least annually, reviewing all of your policies and procedures to see, do they need any updates? Or if they don't, to at least have gone through the process of reviewing those P&Ps annually and getting them approved either by your board if you have one, or by your executive or senior manager. And we will leave some time at the end for any questions, or at least some of the questions that you may type into the chat function while Mike and I are speaking. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Mike Barone, who will start taking you through what's required in relation to policies and procedures. So Mike, all yours.
Thanks, Scott. I appreciate it. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending upon where you are. Thank you for joining. I'm going to start from the top, just with the CFPB. All right, many of you may not even ever see the CFPB, but as we see, their framework is falling down or going downwards to the states. You see what California's doing. New York has their little CFPB office, so to speak, and I think that other states have that in mind. So, you know, even though you might not be a company that is going to see the CFPB directly in an examination, or hopefully never hear from them, using their guidance is always effective with the states, because again, a lot of them are relying upon that framework. You hear the CFPB talking about the compliance management system all the time, right? It's not a policy, it's a system. But one of the main components, one of the core components is our policies and procedures, right? You have your board involvement, senior management involvement, training, complaint management, auditing, monitoring, and you have your P&Ps, right? So, and that doesn't mean, you know, we go back to 15 years ago where you know, the regulator shows up and you take your P&Ps off the cabinet and you hold your breath as long as you can and you blow and you get all the dust off it, all right? And then you hand it to the regulator, all right? Those days are over. You really do need policies and procedures that live and breathe as your company acts, right? They really need to look like it. There's nothing more embarrassing than giving a policy to a regulator that says, I'm gonna do A, B, and C, and they say, let me say A, B, and C, and you don't have any of the three, right? You haven't done A, B, nor C. Right? If you did two of them, maybe it'd be all right, but you haven't done any of them. It's because you didn't read them. You bought them off the shelf, right? Or you got them because an investor or warehouse bank asked for them, and you gave it over, right? But you don't read it, and it says you're going to audit quarterly, or it says you're going to do this, or it says the director of so-and-so is in charge of this policy. You don't even have that position, right? So you have to read your policies, regardless of where you get it from. If you get it from a software provider, you get it from, you hack it offline from someone, from your old job, whatever it is, you got to read it. They have to reflect how you act and what you do. And the CFPB looks for that, all right? And all of the other state regulators look for you. Don't give them up. You're better off with a plan that's defective and they are going to tell you to enhance it than you are with a plan that says you're doing all these things and you're not doing them. I think that the latter makes you look foolish. P&Ps are one of the first things that come into an exam, right? And I think it leads a good reflection on the type of entity they're dealing with and the shop they're dealing with. So it's important, right? It's important to have them. It's important that they look nice. It's important the margins aren't all screwed up. You don't have 1/8 of an inch on the top, 1/8 of an inch on the bottom, 1/8 of an inch on each side. It's optics, but you want your things to look nice. It means something, right? It means the first impression. What's the old saying? You don't get a second chance as a first impression. So if your first impression is with your policies and procedures to a regulator, right? It is what it is. So be aware that these are not just check the box items, right? You gotta make them live and breathe as you're doing business. You will be very happy if you go down that road and do that going forward and take the extra time, make sure the people that are in charge of those policies actually read them, revise them. All right, very important. Okay, so examiners, always reviewing policies and procedures. This is from the CFPB's examination guide. I'm not going to read everything that's on the PowerPoint. You do need to make sure that your policies reflect the products and the services you offer, right? To go into a policy about all types of TPO and wholesale arrangements and arrangements with brokers, and you don't have a wholesale division is silly, right? I mean, you can couch it, put, to the extent we originate wholesale loans in the future, then we're going to do X, Y, and Z. But, some of these policies, again, if you get them off the shelf, they're going to read as if you do retail, wholesale correspondent, you have a complete internal audit program, and everyone doesn't have that. So just, again, make sure you go through them and you look at them. They reflect the products and services you are offering. They reflect the job titles you're speaking about. It's very important to make sure that is the case. So take your time to develop them. It's not going to be done overnight. All right. It's not a one and done, meaning that you don't do it and look at it 5 years later. You have to revisit them as you change things, as laws change. And just make sure that someone's reviewing them that is familiar with that subject matter. That's a little bit of an overview. And again, some of the CFPB. You have Fannie has their requirements. Their requirements in their selling guide call for a policy and procedure for monitoring applicable legal developments. So just keep in mind that's in their guide to the extent you are a seller servicer. What are you doing? What are you doing about the redesign 1003, right? You have a redesign 1003 coming out in March 1, mandatory, right? As of now, we have no direct word that that's going to be adjourned. What are you doing? Right? Fannie requires that you have a policy and procedure for that. Who's in charge of that? Who's the crew that's going to do it? What's the training look like? Who's going to check your systems to make sure when your LOS changes all of the mapping of all the different fields in a 1003, and now your HMDA, instead of your HMDA law reading the address, it reads the loan product, right? Who's going to check all that, right? Those are the things that you got to think about in advance, right? And you could have a committee to do that. You could have a change committee. You could have a legal change committee. You could have someone who falls under compliance. But the idea is there's a requirement many of you maybe you didn't even know that you need a policy procedure under Fannie to monitor legal developments, all right? So if they walk in and ask you, where's your policy and procedure about the new 1003, and you don't have anything, just remember you were warned. I'm just kidding, but it's just an idea, all right? It's just an idea, and for those of you that are saying, what are you talking about, a new redesign 1003? It wasn't April Fool's. There is a new redesign 1003, which is effective March 1st, which looks totally different from the normal 4-page 1003 you have been used to for the last 30 years. So I do recommend you go out and look at that if you haven't seen it yet, or your company hasn't really thought about it yet. Fannie Mae Servicing Guide also talks about, policies and procedures. You need to have policies and procedures to ensure that servicing is being done right. You need policies and procedures to ensure that you're using a subservicer, you are engaging in quality control of that subservicer. You need a quality control subservicing policy to show what you're doing or what a third party is doing from you. One of the services MQMR offices is subservicing QC. So if you have any questions with that, you can always reach out. But the idea is that you need the policies and procedures on servicing as well. And you're not exempted just because you have a subservicer, right? You can't just take their policies and procedures and give it to Fannie. They won't be very satisfied. They want your own. Now you incorporate your subservices procedures into your own, but again, they want your own procedures. They want you to have knowledge of servicing and know what services is about, even though you're relying upon a subservicer. Freddie, same thing. Why I keep skipping. Freddie mentions certain documents, but it's just a point of emphasis. It doesn't mean you only need these 5 or 6 policies and procedures, right? That's not what they're saying. Scott and I picked out 8 what we think are core policies and procedures. We're going to discuss them one by one in a little bit. Information security, BSA, and quality control are 3 of those 8. Those are on here. So is servicing and oversight. But again, it doesn't mean just because they say these are the most important that nothing else is important, right? Obviously, information security, AML, quality control enormously important to the agencies, and that's why they pick these out, servicing, right? But you might not be as important to a state regulator or some other examiner you have. So these are just an example of the policies they mention in their guides that are required. But again, think of it as just the most, the ones they put the most emphasis on, but not necessarily the ones that are only required. It's just a specific list. It's not an exclusive list. It's not an all-inclusive list. Other people looking for policies, these are the ones you probably hear from more often, your state regulators, your warehouse line providers, and your investors, right? They are constantly asking you for policies. State regulators, we spoke about. Warehouse line providers and secondary market providers is a little different story, right? They are not your regulators per se. They're your counterparties, people you need to survive. Have to judge that. Sometimes, they're looking for a policy and they, other than seeing the title of the policy, they don't look any further, right? It's a check the box item. You might ask you for your AML policy. You give it to them. There's no comments. There's no questions. There's no anything. They checked off the box. We got your AML policy. Now you're approved. Again, just because your investor or your warehouse line accepts the policy, don't accept that as, being regulatory, a regulator, the CFPB, the agencies would be satisfied. Realize the difference, right? Sometimes people call me up, they say, look, I'm trying to get into a warehouse line. They want a QC policy. Can I just give them something to get by and then I'll go back and review it? That's fine. You want to do that, it's your business, right? But remember to go back to review it, right? Giving it to a warehouse line provider or a secondary market investor, right, so you can get by their requirement is fine. But don't forget to look at that policy, make sure it acts and breathes as you do business, and then you wind up giving it to a state regulator and you look like a fool, right? So know the purpose of what these policies are developed for. I understand that a warehouse and an investor is not usually going to, go into the policy the way a regulator would. But again, they could, and just make sure that, you're not going to look foolish when they say, here, where is X, Y, and Z? And, oh, I don't have that, right? You may not get that warehouse line. So be careful. They are definitely looking into QC, AML, I think fair lending as well. Those three, you do see warehouses and investors looking at those in a little more detail, especially QC. Some of the bigger aggregators are looking at them. So just be aware, it's not as it was where you just ran it off the printer and sent it over to them and slapped your name on it and you were done. Just be careful, because again, these policies and procedures have a way of making their way into your system and becoming a part of your organization. Then someone else picks it up for a different purpose, sees it in there, sees the title and attaches it to an email and sends it. They don't know the purpose of that policy was to, get approved by an investor. Right? And they go and they send it to the CFPB, right? They don't know, right? The right hand's not talking to the left hand. So just be careful when you're dealing with these policies. You're using them for different purposes. You're rushing, you're taking your friends, you're throwing your name on it. Be careful. It looks like crap. There's no consistency to them. They don't play off each other. And it's blatantly obvious to people. When you talk about a regulator, they look at these policies every day, right? The biggest policy providers out there, you don't think they've seen them. You don't think they know what they are by the typeset. They know them the second they see the cover, right? They know exactly who made it, right? If it's one of the major providers, right? They know exactly how it looks like if you don't vary it to your company, and they know exactly how it looks like when it's off the presses, right? They see them every day, right? That policy from 2016, they know who did it, and they know it's from 2016. And when you throw in something else that doesn't look like it, they're pretty sure you got that one off the internet. All right. Have consistency. Take pride and ownership in your policies and procedures. They're a reflection of your company. They go to regulators. They go to warehouse line providers. They go to investors. Right. Have pride in them. They're a reflection of your company. They really do. And when I have new clients and I ask them for their policies and look at them, it is a dead red indication of whether you have a company that really takes compliance seriously. And if I'm thinking that, a regulator is, right? So it's easy to do. Take the time to do it, right? And do what you got to do to make sure your policy and procedures are effective. All right. Scott and I are going to go through 8 different policies now. And just go through one by one. We're going to go through a compliance management system policy, a remote work telecommuting policy, which is pretty apropos now, our business continuity and disaster recovery policy, which is pretty apropos now, quality control, it's always important, fair lending, BSA, ECOA, and subservicer management. So that was only 8. I spoke quickly, hopefully you got the 8, but those 8 we picked out to sort of, we consider them a little more important for various reasons. We'll get into why we do, but those are the ones that we are going to be discussing today. I'm going to open up with the compliance management system policy, and then we're going to flip-flop one by one. Scott will do the next one, and then I'll go and so on, so you don't get bored of our voices. You know, a compliance management is a system, not a policy, right? You can't, if someone says, do you have a compliance management system, you don't say here and hand them a 10-page document, right? That's not what I mean, right? But it is, the policy is a way to sort of encompass what you are doing, right? It's sort of put it all together. So, you know, I talked about the pillars of a compliance management system. You have governance, you have training, monitoring, consumer complaints, and policies and procedures, which we're talking about, right? Those are more or less the pillars, right? Depending upon your business plan and your how you do business, you may, you know, vary that a little, but those are basically the pillars that people look at. And you'd want to give a blurb about each of those. What do you do in terms of what is your board and senior management involvement, right? That's governance. What is your training? Who do you train? New hires. When do you train them? Monitoring and auditing. What's your internal audit process? Consumer complaints. How you handle them? What's your process? Where's your log, right? Your policies and procedures. Where are they? How often are they updated, right? So all of those go into a compliance management system and would be reflected in a CMS policy, right? Again, you might have an independent auditing policy. You might have an independent complaint management policy. You might have an independent training policy. You'll reference them in there. It's just an idea. It's just to show that you understand the compliance management system. You're aware of it. You're going to talk about the compliance officer, who that is, right? If you have some committee or two, you know, compliance committee that meets a lot, you might throw that in. But again, it's one policy that sort of ties a lot together. You hear the CFPB and other regulators talking about a CMS all the time. It's a good idea to have that policy. It's important. It's something that is asked for. And again, sort of ties everything together. If you don't have a separate training policy, then maybe you go a little more in depth in there, right? How often are your trainings? Are they quarterly? Are they monthly, right? How is it tracked? How long do they have to do them? What happens when they don't do them, right? How do you get the person to do it, the LO to do it? Oh, he's a very high producer. He's our #1 producer. I can't make him do anything. Bad answer. You know, monitoring, auditing, what are you doing? A lot of ways to skin the cat here, right? And monitoring, auditing, done different ways by every company, the amount, the frequency, what you audit, what you monitor. Tell a little about what you do, right? Tell a little about what you do. This is your plan. This is not a plan that you're going to go teach a course with, right? This is your plan, right? This is not what I'm doing here. I don't know your company, right? You know your company. It should be subjective. It should speak to your company. You should be proud of it, of what the things you are doing, right? If you're not doing these things, it happens, right? Start doing them one by one, right? Start with one training, right? It's better than none, right? Start with one audit. It's better than none. Rome wasn't built in a day. Build out a compliance management system. It's called building it, right? Once you get there, and it might take years, then you maintain it, right? And this is the policy that you will talk about that with, right? You will talk about it in this policy. It holds the whole compliance system together. You can have a good compliance management system. You put that right on top to a regulator. It's a nice start. Again, it's not going to get you out of it if you're committing fraud all over the place, but it's a nice start. It makes a nice impression, right, to show how it's thought about, and we put this all together. I'm going to turn it over to Scott for the next policy. Remember, do not put anything in there you're not doing. You will look very foolish. All right, Scott, go ahead.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. Let me move this forward. Oh, the other way. Okay, so I just want to emphasize a couple of points that Mike made generally about policies and procedures, and then I'll spend a couple of minutes on the specific remote work or telecommute policy. Mike mentioned that a common issue that we see all the time, and we see it in the internal audit space as well, which is the policies and procedures are generic. So it may have the company's name at the top, but you can tell that it's not tied specifically to your organization. I've even seen some that it actually says the company will do this or that throughout the document. Just a big red flag that it's something they got from somewhere. In addition to that Mike went over, another thing we see all the time with policies and procedures is a lack of any revision history. And so I mentioned earlier that in addition to having policies and procedures, we ought to be reviewing them on an annual basis at least, to make sure that if any updates are needed, either because of changes to laws or regulations or agency guidelines, or because you've changed how you operate in some way, your policies and procedures need to be updated to reflect that. So for example, if we see a policy, it could be the most beautiful one we've ever seen. It could not only have your name at the top, but everything is tailored specifically to your company. But if the date on it says 2016, then we know right away, well, now that it's 2020, that it hasn't been looked at since then. Or it at least gives the appearance to a regulator or an investor that that policy hasn't been looked at in 4 years. And as Mike mentioned, while a secondary market investor or a warehouse investor might not read the policies too thoroughly, even they would notice if your policy has a date on it of 2016 and there's no evidence that it's been looked at since then. So that's one of the things we recommend a lot to our clients, is make sure that there's a revision history in all of your policy documents. So at least once a year, whoever reads it, right, regulator, agency, or investors alike, will be able to see that between 2016 and 2020, there's 4 entries in there, right, of what you looked at every year, and it would either outline the changes, if you made any, or that it was reviewed and approved again without changes because there didn't need to be any changes to that particular policy. So just a really important point that I think we want to remember across the board for all of these policies. So specifically, let's think about remote work and or telecommuting. As we know, the global pandemic of 2020 had a lot of effects and impacts on all of us, right? Professionally and personally. So one of those impacts was a huge shift. Let me go back a second. Mike, if maybe you can move it back. I'm not sure, I'm not able to move it back. But a huge shift in work from in-office to remote telecommuting. So I'll just go ahead, Mike, while you're doing that. But so what happens is you now have employees at your shop that are working both in office and remotely. There's many things to think about. First, when thinking about remote work or telecommuting, is how are you making sure that the information and the data of your borrowers is being kept confidential and secure? So one of the ways you can do that is to have a set of policies and procedures that all of your employees who are working remotely can abide by. And so by doing that, you're going to be able to make sure that whether your employees are in an office or if they're working remotely, that not only is a borrower's information going to be kept secure and confidential, but that there isn't going to be information that might be at risk of someone grabbing. So for example, are you making sure that your employees have a separate and private workspace, right? Or that they're not out in the middle of some part of a house where there's all kinds of people, there we go, milling around, right? And how are you tracking your equipment? So now with people working remotely, there are people that may have, computers and monitors and all types of things that your company is sending out. Are you tracking that so you know what's out there, right? And what your employees have. And now we're in a situation, I think it used to be a few months ago when COVID-19 caused most or all employees at a shop to be working remotely. Now there might be a situation, and we have found this with a lot of our clients, that it's split, it's both. There are companies where some of their employees are working in an office and some of the employees are working remotely, and or employees themselves might be splitting time. They might spend some time working in an office and some of their time working at home. So they may be using different equipment in 2 different places. And so these are all examples of things that you want to be thinking about and providing for in your policies and procedures. And for example, are you making sure that your employees have good internet access? Are they going to be able to be in meetings with you over Zoom or whatever system or function you may be using? Even more importantly, are they going to be able to communicate effectively and have good connectivity issues with people outside your company that they may be meeting with? Particularly if that should happen to be a regulator or an investor or an agency, and it's a remote employee who will be meeting with them, a lot of examinations and things may still be happening remotely. Is that going to be set up? Is your company going to be set up with remote work? And then in particular, when your employees are coming back into the office, and Mike's going to get into this a little bit more in a second, with disaster recovery or business continuity, what are you doing there? But I think one of the things you've seen is there's a lot of companies, perhaps out of a lack of necessity. Obviously, the pandemic that we've seen hasn't been something at that level in a long time, right? So a lot of companies haven't really had a remote work policy at all. I can tell you from my experience working in the industry before coming to MQMR, I think in the mortgage industry, there had been some reluctance historically to actually allow people, at least on any large scale, to work remotely in the first place. And it immediately went from that culture of not much or any at all remote working or telecommuting to almost everybody or everybody working 100% remotely for a period of months. And things are just now starting maybe to divide back, but there's a lot of people out there still working at home up to and including 100% of their time. So there needs to be a policy and procedure for how that works. That, you know, at a minimum, I think these are a lot of different things and tips that your policy and procedure can include. So with that, I'll let Mike take it from there to the next policy topic.
Okay. Let me see if I can. All right, I don't know why the slide is not moving, but be that as it may. The next policy I want to discuss, there we go, is business continuity and disaster recovery. And they are not the same thing. They are related, but they are not the same thing, and they are intertwined and talked about as the same thing, but they're not. Business continuity is a plan of action. It ensures that your regular business will continue without interruption, right? Essentially, that's the modus of a business continuity plan. Your disaster recovery plan is a subset of your business continuity plan. That just deals with restoring vital systems. So the technical operations, getting that up to speed as quick as you can, right? We all can't live without that. We can't do our business, can't do anything without technical operations working. So that's really more the disaster recovery part. The business continuity is the overall ability for the organization to keep on working. So when you talk about a business continuity plan, you're talking about, you know, how you're going to minimize interruptions, how are you going to limit external interruptions, how are you going to minimize financial, reputational damages. Those are the things, how you're going to train your employees on it. Those are the things you should think about when you're doing a business continuity plan, right? Those are you think about. You gotta identify some key management contacts, right? And their contact information. You might put an alternate location in there for what you're going to do if your system goes down. I mean, there are a variety of things that can happen. You could have a flood. You could have a loss of power. You could have some other reason that you have to evacuate where you are. You could have an outside source that created a problem. So there's a lot of different things that could happen in terms of to disrupt your business. Having an alternate location, having remote access, right? Making sure that is all set up, how that is done. Do you have a phone chain, right? There's people that have phone chains for their employees, all right? What if emails aren't working? What if emails are down, right? How are you going to get in touch with your employees if there's a flood and no one's supposed to come to the office that day, right? And the emails are down, right? Because your server room got flooded. I'm making this up as we go, but a phone chain is a nice thing. You got to go into data redundancy, some backups there. You have people who you rely upon externally. You might have numbers of, if you're using Encompass, you're using some of a big LOS, you might have some of their names and contact information. But you need to have a way to contact with your customers, contact with your employees and have contact with your business partners, all right? Those are things that are always reflected in a business continuity plan. You'd also need to identify some recovery steps. What are you doing if a compass goes down, right? What are you doing if your email goes down? What's your process? Who calls who, right? You're gonna run around like a chicken with its head cut off, or you're gonna know exactly what to do because it's in your business continuity plan. What are you doing if your internet access goes down, your phone services go down, or some other internal resources go down, right? These are key components to which you can't continue to work that day without, right? So you should have a plan for what you do if they go down, right? As opposed to just sending everybody home and telling everyone you can't have your closings tonight, go live in a trailer or go live in a hotel for the night, right? So it really, I make jokes, but it's really, you have to have these plans. Things happen, right? Things do happen, right? It's incredible, but these things happen from time to time, and you'll be very happy if you have them. I had an office years and years ago where there was in New York City, where there was a giant explosion, manhole cover exploded. We couldn't get in for 3 weeks, right? 3 weeks we couldn't get into our office with no notice whatsoever. I sure wish we thought about that possibility, you know, before that happened. I can guarantee you, I wish I thought about that possibility before it happened. If we got shut out of our office for 3 weeks, what would we do? You know, I really, you know, you talk about, you could, you know, law firms could have original collateral. It's a million things that can happen. So have a plan. It's very effective. Have a plan. You know, disaster recovery goes over a few different things because it's more dealing with your IT, your systems, right? So you might deal with your external support people, have them listed in there, your internal support people, information on results. You have to test this. So all types of different things, your server room power, your network equipment, all different types of things you're going to go through in terms of in situations. This is not meant for a non-IT person, right? And it's not meant for someone in compliance to be able to formulate a disaster recovery plan and a business continuity plan. You might be able to have the framework, right? You might be able to have the bare bones. You have to have an IT person involved. IT has to take ownership of those policies, right? They have to. They have to take ownership with respect to testing them, right? At least annually, if not sooner, if not more frequently. But they have to take ownership of those plans. You can't do it through compliance unless you have a very detailed IT background. So it has to be done cumulatively with them, and you have to get them to buy in and to recognize those external factors that could happen and essentially shut you down, essentially put you out of business, right? You don't have it in Compass, you're out of business for the day. You don't have electricity, you're out of business for the day, right? Yeah, you could, but what are you gonna do to stay in business? People gotta be shuttled home, they have to have access. You need a backup place for them to do it, right? Do you have shredder bins for them at home? How are you dealing with the privacy issues at home, right? This all goes into a plan. So don't think about it when it happens and make the mistake I made several years ago. Think about it now. Go ahead, Scott.
Thanks, Mike. So the next policy or plan that we want to touch on for a couple minutes is quality control. And in particular, with the GSEs, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, this is a huge point of emphasis with them. I think that's always the case. But in particular, over this year in 2020, we have heard a lot about it from them. In fact, a lot of clients with whom we work at MQMR have come to us for reasons all related to GSEs. Either they're trying to get approved with them, or they are approved with Fannie or Freddie, and they've had a review, and quality control has been raised as an issue in some way. And what we have on this slide are a few of those things that we commonly see. So obviously, number one, the first step is that you must have a quality control plan in place, right? And then secondly, with that plan, is it fully compliant with GSE's requirements? And I can tell you there's really two parts to that. First is there are specific things that in the guides from Fannie and Freddie that are specifically required to be in a company's QC plan. Then there are other things that are recommended to be in there as best practices. But I can tell you, I would consider those to be more than just suggestions, because Fannie and Freddie will ask about those things if they're not in your QC plan and suggest that you put them in there, which to me sounds pretty much the same thing as a requirement. So with that, what are some of the things that we see that might be deficient or not included in a company's QC plan? So one would be sampling. Obviously, Fannie and Freddie have requirements based on what percentage of loans you should be reviewing, and beyond a random sample of loans, are you reviewing extra loans on top of that based on criteria? And what might some of that criteria be? Maybe loans that might have extra layers of risk. Could it be related to FICO, or could it be non-owner occupied properties? Any elements that might have extra elements of risk within that loan program or loan type, are you looking at a percentage of those as well? In other words, to be on the lookout beyond your random sample of loans where there might be an issue with the quality associated with that loan because of the complexity, or again, the layer of risk. And also, just even taking a step back, is there something in your QC plan that defines what your sample will be and how it will be selected and how you will review those loans each month? And then also, one thing we see is that many companies, instead of doing the QC reviews either pre-funding or post-closing or both, they utilize a third-party QC vendor to perform the reviews for them and issue them a monthly report. That's completely fine. The agencies would be fine with that. But what they would want to see, and this is something where we see some companies fall short sometimes, is if you're using a third-party vendor to do some or all of your QC reviews, what are you doing to monitor them? So for example, if you have an outside vendor monitoring 10% of your loans every month, are you reviewing 10% of those loans yourself? Which of course would be 1% of your overall loans. But are you reviewing, for example, 10% of the loans that your vendor reviewed? Now, why would you do that? Well, the answer is obviously to have monitoring and oversight of those vendors. What if, for example, you review that 10% of what the vendor reviewed and you find a bunch of issues and the vendor came back and said all your loans were clean with no issues? That's something that you'd want to provide feedback to that vendor. And if that continues to be a pattern where you know there are issues with your loans, but your vendor's not finding them, it sounds like it might be time for a new QC vendor then. And so you're not going to know that, though. You won't know that and have that validation that you're assessing the true quality of your loans if you're not doing a check of the checker, right? That's a common phrase. You got to check the checker. Trust but verify. You can trust what your vendor's doing, but you want to verify it. You want to see what issues you're finding, and hopefully they'll be the same as what your vendor is citing. Oversight and monitoring of appraisals as well as part of the quality control reviews. That's an element that we see that's missing sometimes. Another thing that we see that is missing is the timely completion for both pre-funding and post-closing. As I'm sure we know, the agencies require certain cycle times that they get done and that the reports get done and distributed within your organization. And so number one, we like to see that in your plan, that the reports will be done and this is our cycle time to make sure it's compliant. And then secondly, to emphasize a point Mike made earlier, if you have something in your plan that's going to say we're going to do it in this many days, to make sure that's what you're actually doing, that you're living up to the cycle times that you've set for yourself. And then, lastly, as a general comment, there are a lot of different parts of what your procedures are for performing QC audits. Either if you're doing it internally or having a QC vendor do it for you, the guidelines want to make sure that that's spelled out, right? How are the loans selected? Are those loans stopped from moving forward while they're in QC review? What is done with the results? How to make sure that a loan, for example, that might have fraud in it or suspected misrep, how is that handled? If it's pre-funded, to make sure it doesn't fund, or if it's post-closing, what are you doing about it? So a lot of different elements with QC. And again, I just want to emphasize it's a big point of emphasis for the GSEs right now. So Mike, I'll turn it back over to you for a minute on fair lending.
Okay, I'm going to speed up a little because we're running out of time, but if we go a minute or two over, we will wait and take any questions you have. Fair lending, you really can't talk about fair lending without talking about HMDA, ECOA, fair credit, fair housing. You run the gamut with it. But it's important to have a policy. I think this is one of the policies that are asked for, right? You really should have a fair lending policy. You should do fair lending training. You should do some type of fair lending testing, right, on your data. So that's what goes into the policy, right? How are you training? What testing are you doing? you know, it depends on the company. Some people will do quarterly testing. Some people will do annual testing. Some people will do a regression analysis. Some do less than a regression analysis. So, you know, there's different strokes for different folks, so to speak. But again, what you are doing should be reflected in the policy, right? All of the information that you're going to treat people consistently, fairly, all that should be in your policies. It is called fair lending. The items or the things that you won't take into account when you are determining whether to grant credit, you know, race, religion, natural origin, sex, the whole kit and caboodle, marital status. So that should all go through it. And again, then you train off your policy so that your employees are available. The one thing I wanted to say specifically about this is, you know, you have some states that have fair lending requirements and regulations on their own. I think Georgia, New York, and they'll require you to have their specific regulation or regulatory guidance mentioned in your policy. So keep those in mind. And keep in mind, it's not when we're mentioning about a pricing concession policy. Be very careful on your pricing concessions that you have a policy for that, which is CFPB demanded you have in 2016. Pricing concession policy, and you are keeping notations and memorializing the reasons for pricing concessions, because that is a tremendous fair lending risk, and you want that documented in a policy. Go ahead, Scott.
Thank you, Mike. Okay. There we go. So the next one is BSA, the Bank Secrecy Act, and an anti-money laundering program and policy. So as we know, for all organizations, it's required that you have an actual entire program, of which a BSA AML policy is an important part. And so that program includes many things. You need to have a compliance officer for AML designated. You need to have training for your employees. You need obviously to go through the process of investigating suspected fraud and filing the suspicious activity report, or SAR, if and when appropriate, and to keep the confidentiality associated with that. One of the things that we see commonly is the last piece, which is as part of the AML program requirements, you must have an independent audit that's done by someone outside your organization every year on an annual basis. One piece of good news for the purposes of this conversation is actually Mike Barone and his group, that's one of the things they do for clients. And so if any of you might be looking for a company to do that, you can reach out to us. But that's one of the things we see. We don't see evidence that companies have that independent annual audit of their AML program. And particularly it's something that would be in a company's policy, but you have to make sure you do it. And the good news about it is if you do it, you will get that external validation that the program that you put in place is working well and that it's sufficient to meet the requirements that's set out in the federal law. Another thing that we see commonly relates to those SARs, those suspicious activity reports. You need to be documenting that, number one, you have a policy to do it in the first place. And then what is your process for employees to refer something that they think might be suspicious? If an employee doesn't know what to do, then you're not going to know about them to know if you need to investigate something that might be SAR worthy in the first place. So what's your process? How can an employee refer something, and where or to whom do they refer it? Secondly, what do you do with it once it's referred? What's your investigation process like? What is the timing? Because there's timing requirements to submit the SAR once you're aware of something that may potentially be suspicious and worthy of the SAR filing. And then lastly, again, the confidentiality. The only people who should know about a suspicious activity report that is filed are the people who were part of the process of referring the issue and the person investigating it and filing the SAR if it was deemed worthy. Not something to tell your whole organization about, hey, we filed 5 SARs today, let me tell you what happened. They need to remain confidential and only on a need-to-know basis for the people who are part of that issue. So that's just at a high level BSA AML, and I'll turn it back over to you, Mike.
All right, ECOA, Reg B, another policy you should have, and the reason why we picked this one is this policy never reflects, or very rarely reflects exactly what the lender is doing, right? There's a lot of different ways to disposition files, right? Your Reg B policy, very similar to fair lending, should go through all of the items you can't take into account when rendering credit to make sure there's equal credit opportunity for all. But, you have some variance here. Lenders have some discretion here. What you define as an application under RECOA is essentially, left to a lender's discretion. And all lenders don't treat it differently, so you can't have the same policy, right? You can't just roll out the same policy because you have different requirements for the definition of an application and when your 30 days would start to count, right? So that's you have to be careful there. Same thing with a completed application. What you need, may differ in lender interpretation. So these are specific policies, and the way you disposition files are going to be different than the way someone else does it. Some people look at reports, some people have teams, some people have the LOs do it, some people have the underwriters do it, processors do it. So again, it could be compliance. There's a million different ways, to skin the cat, and it doesn't mean anyone's doing it wrong, but you have to do it and you have to follow the regulation. I put on here a bullet on withdrawn files because withdrawn files is outrageous. What I see, what I see in terms of the percentage of withdrawn files with some companies, it's clear that their LOs don't understand the difference between withdrawn and someone not calling you back, right? Someone not calling you back is not a withdrawal, right? They have to affirmatively withdraw. You can't infer it, right? And it's being done wrong all over the place, right? So have that in your policy, train to your policy, and then audit your policy. Very easy. What percentage of John Smith's files are withdrawn? What percentage of Mary Smith's files are withdrawn? 72%, a little high, right? So you look at these things, right? It's not hard. You have your policy, what you do, train to the policy, audit the policy, right? It's not hard. It does take time. It does take resources, but that's a perfect example of how to do it, right? Tell your people on the GEO information, right? The government monitoring, GMO information, government monitoring information. Tell them how to do it, right? Train them. Then check. Oh, John Smith, 99 out of his 100 applications, the borrower didn't want to give that information. What do you think is happening? Do you think he's asking for that information, right? Write your policies, train to them, and audit, right? You'll be really ahead of the curve if you do that. All right, Scott, take us away with the last one.
I sure will. Thanks, Mike. So the last one is subservicer management and oversight. So one of the things that we see very consistently with many clients with whom we work, perhaps many of your organizations on this webinar today, after your loans are funded and originated, you may retain the servicing rights. So as the master servicer, though, you may not have the capacity or desire to service the loans in-house yourself. So you contract with a subservicer, and that third-party company performs the day-to-day servicing activities for your loans for which you're the master servicer. So in particular, I think I'll start with the CFPB. The very first compliance bulletin that they ever put out was related to monitoring your third-party service providers, of which this was the biggest one. And that you as the lender are responsible, or the master servicer in this case, are responsible for that issue. And any errors that the third party with whom you contract may make, you are still responsible. And in fact, the CFPB has put out several additional compliance bulletins since that first one about the same topic. Now, why might they have done that? Put out several bulletins on the same topic. It's because they have still found in examinations that companies are not doing this well enough to meet what they're looking for. So when I say that, what are some of the common mistakes that I see? Well, it even starts at the beginning, that companies who use a third party to service their loans tend to rely on them completely. So I've seen some cases where there actually isn't a policy at all about what oversight of that subservicer is going on at all, if any, because there's not a policy that describes it. Or even if there is one, what are you actually doing? Are you auditing some of your loans that are being serviced by the third party? Are you looking at loans to make sure, are they doing them compliantly? Are they doing them operationally effectively? Are you getting the results that you want for this servicer servicing your loans? What about calls? All calls that are recorded are things that you can review. Any subservicer that you have working for your loans ought to be able to give you samples of recorded calls every month that you can and should be listening to at your organization for many reasons. One, just to see how do those calls go between your servicer who's servicing your loans for you and the borrowers. But then also, are they following everything compliantly, doing the mini Miranda, all of those different things? And then in addition to, are they getting good outcomes of those calls? Does the borrower leave the call in a better place than they did when they started? And then also, what data and reporting are you getting from your subservicer? Is it enough for you to know, again, are things being done compliantly, and are they being done effectively by that subservicer? In other words, do you want to keep using them? And you know, in addition to the compliance aspects of it, how do you know if you want to keep using that subservicer if you don't have the data and reporting to show you detail about what's going on with your loans? And those reports and data should have ways for you to then go and look at the individual loan level to the extent you want. Finally, what are you doing in terms of providing feedback back to your subservicer? If you're monitoring their performance, what are you telling them? So if there are things that they're doing well, are you telling them what those things are? And if there are things that you want them to do differently and better, are you telling them that at all, number one, and how? Are you giving them a scorecard, or are you meeting with them enough so that they know if they're not meeting your expectations in some way, how they can meet those expectations that you have? And so with that, I think we are just a couple minutes over the hour. I just want to say for me, and I think I can speak for Mike when I say we both really enjoyed having the opportunity to talk with you over the last hour. We hope you got some helpful tips about your policies and procedures. And again, if there's any way at MQMR that we can help you and provide assistance, we're happy to do that. Here's our contact information. We'd be happy for you to reach out to us at any time, and we can put you in touch with the right person that you need. So with that, I think I see, it seems the questions maybe that have come up have been answered, but Susan, I'll turn it back over to you just in case.
Sure, thank you. And Michael, Scott, thank you so much for a very robust presentation. Fantastic information for everyone, regardless of where they are kind of on the spectrum of their compliance program. So if you have a question for Michael or Scott, you can type that into the questions dialog box on the right hand of your screen. They will be on for a few more minutes to answer any of those questions. We have recorded today's webinar, and we'll be providing that recorded version on our website for anybody to share with maybe your colleagues that weren't able to join you today. A couple things in the questions, but really just saying that it was all great reminders and to thank you both for a great presentation. So I think you did a great job of kind of answering people's questions as you went along. So just one more reminder that this is the last and final MQAC webinar for 2020. We will resume those again in January 28th. But in the meantime, I encourage you to join us for our virtual legal issues and regulatory compliance conference that'll be happening on December 7th and 8th. And there's our website right there if you'd like to visit that page and find out more about that event. That concludes today's webinar. Thank you again, Michael and Scott, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.